You're on mute.
Thanks, Abel. Hi, everybody. It is 10:10, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining today's session, Running Effective Financial Aid Workshops in Uncertain Times. My name is Nicole Boyd, and I am a Training and Development Specialist for the Illinois Student Assistance Commission, here with Abel Montoya. As a reminder, this session is being recorded. The chat will be available to allow you to network with other participants, but we do ask that you use the Q&A feature to ask any questions. It just makes it a little bit easier for us to answer your questions. And just as a reminder, the recording of this session and copies of the presentation will be available after today's session. So now I'm going to turn it over to Abel, and we can go ahead and get started.
Very good. Thank you, Nicole. So good morning, everyone. My name is Abel Montoya, as Nicole mentioned. I'm going to share my presentation. I have a lot of good stuff for you today. So I'm going to share my whole screen because I'm going to share some PDFs and other resources for you during this presentation. So let me just get situated here. Okay. So when they asked me to present at this conference, I was like, well, I think a lot of people already know how to run a workshop. But I approach it from the perspective of there's a lot of things that are occurring right now in our current let's call it landscape. Our current landscape that has brought up some questions, some scenarios that has made us kind of pause and kind of say, okay, well, let's step back and take a look at how we're doing things to see if we're still providing good, effective information and helping students wherever they may be in the process. Hence the title of, doing these workshops on certain times. It seems like these times have started since COVID back in 2020, and something new comes up every year, and we have to pivot and adjust the way we do things. And that's okay because, students need us, and we're here to help those individuals and their parents and their families with this process, which could be at times confusing, convoluted, and perplexing to everyone involved. As you know, I work for the Illinois Students Commission, which is a state agency that administers a number of programs and grants, specifically the Monetary Award Program, which is our major grant. But we have a lot of other scholarships and programs. I work with the ISAC Corps. I'm my official title is Director of Outreach Operations, and one of the things that I use to kind of drive everything we do is our mission statement. Providing Illinois students with information and assistance to help make education beyond high school accessible and affordable. Students have lots of questions. Parents have lots of questions because they come from all different kinds of backgrounds. I tell my staff members that, they should be able to work with everyone and anyone, regardless of their situation, regardless of their background. And we try to train them and be as well versed as possible because everyone has different concerns, different questions. And I speak from my personal experience. I want to tell you a little bit about who I am. I know some of you, I was looking through the chat or the list of attendees, I recognize a few names. But for those of you who don't know me, I'm a first generation college student. So I understand how confusing it could be at times and not knowing what to expect, after high school. I came to the US at a very young age. I was 5 years old when I came to the US, and English is my second language. So I understand how the educational system can be confusing for parents who weren't educated in the US. And I also understand that, the verbiage that we use, the acronyms, oh my goodness, the acronyms that we have, I have to remind myself that everyone knows what FSA stands for, Federal Student Aid, right? And the FAFSA, Free Application Federal Student Aid. We have to be cognizant of that because language could be an obstacle. It could be a challenge for individuals, even for those for whom English is their first language. When we use the language of applying for financial aid and the terminology, it can be confusing for many. And I like to share my experience. I've been working in this field for over 31 years in the financial aid and the college admission side. So I've seen things change over the years. And the one thing that I think is a constant is that there are people willing to help. There are individuals that are there to be a resource. And that would be you folks that are here joining me today. And the folks, at ISAC, I like to consider the people that work for us. Individuals that really do have students' best interest in mind. And that's where my role comes in. I work and oversee the ISAC Corps. For those of you who may not be familiar, the ISAC Corps is a group of recent college graduates that we hire for for a 2 to 3 year service commitment. During this time, they work with students navigating the college going process, especially how to pay for college. Oftentimes, this could be sitting down with the student to help them fill out the FAFSA or the alternative application, or to look at scholarships, or maybe to do some career exploration, or look at colleges, anything that they may need. The ISAC core, what we do is we try to hire individuals that were first generation themselves and or who are MAP or Pell eligible. So individuals that know the challenges that students face in the field. And over 50% of the staff are either first gen or were themselves MAP and Pell eligible. And we hire them and place them throughout the state. We break up the state geographically by community college district. So they work with all the schools and community-based organizations within that geographic area. And I mentioned this so you folks can utilize them. If you haven't worked with the core member, make sure that you find out who your core member is, so you can connect with them and they can help with the process themselves. All right. So with that being said, I just want to go over a few goals, as to why we're here today. Now, some of you are pros at this. Others may be new to this process, but I hope everyone can learn, some things, how to best assist and support students where they are in the process, because students are in very different parts. I'll talk about some of the common challenges that we see in the field, specifically with completing the FAFSA or the alternative application for Illinois financial aid. I'll also talk about some of the steps, the proactive steps that people can take, with workshops to get a good turnout, to make sure students are informed, and they actually, because we want them to show up for these events. And then I'm also going to share a number of resources that are, available to you, so you can utilize them for your workshops. Because ultimately that's the key. How do we get students, to apply and get that financial aid? And I'd like to take a moment to talk a little bit about what financial aid is, because we find that many students are confused about the term, that term financial aid. What is financial aid? Well, when I talk to students and parents, I mention a number of things. I mentioned that it comes from various sources, and we'll talk about that in just a bit. That it's supposed to help make college affordable, and it's supposed to cover the gap between what a family can afford to pay and what the college costs. And when I do my presentations, I use this example. I use my hands and I say, okay, say college costs this much and you can afford this much. That gap in between is what financial aid is supposed to fill. And hopefully it fills it with money that's either given, borrowed, or earned. So I start my presentations with that. And that's something you can say during your workshops. If say your parents or families haven't been to a financial aid presentation, you can start off right there, and you can say the reason you're here is so we can get you some of that money that you may be using for college. And it comes in different forms. We tell them that it comes as gift aid, which is exactly that, money that's gifted, so it's free stuff. And then we have the self-help aid, and that's the money for which you need to do something in return. And with gift aid, I mentioned that we have grants and scholarships, and this is where I start introducing the terminology. And I mentioned that grants are typically need-based, so there's an economic factor. The families have some financial need to get these grants, while scholarships are awarded for whatever the criteria the organization that's given it deems it to be. Okay, but in both cases, grants and scholarships are free money, and that's why those FAFSAs or alternative applications what is being used to apply for it. Then with self-help aid, I tell them there's work study, which is part of something for which students would be considered when they fill out the FAFSA. And then with loans, I tell them that the caveat with that, or the guidelines that you should use, is only borrow what you need and no more. Only what you need and no more, because they have to be paid back. With rare exception, they're not dischargeable in bankruptcy. Okay, so I start off with that piece, and either through a presentation, which we'll get in a bit, or through some of the literature that we send out, so they understand why they're showing up to these workshops. And then I mentioned the sources of financial aid. I mentioned that there's the federal government, which is the Department of Education. There's a state government, which would actually be us, ISAC, the Illinois Commission, the college universities, and then the private sources. And the reason why I mention the sources is because I tell them that each of them has their own criteria as to who's eligible to receive that financial aid. And I also mentioned that eligibility is based on the status of the student, not the parent, but the student, okay? And that the student is primarily responsible to pay for his or her education. So it's based on student status. So for some students, who are, for example, born in the U.S. or U.S. permanent residents or eligible non-citizens, they qualify for all four sources. But for those who are not, eligible for federal aid, say they're certain qualified undocumented students in Illinois, they can qualify for three sources: through the state, through the college, and through the private sources. So some students may qualify for all four, some may qualify for three. And I start painting that picture so that the families have an understanding. Okay, so which application do I fill out? Okay, and for the parents, I let them know you're only here to provide information to see what, hypothetically the family can contribute to to the student's education, but the child is primarily responsible. Because we get a lot of pushback from parents saying, well, why do I need my info? I don't want to give my info. This and that. I don't want to take out any loans. I'm like, well, you don't have to do anything besides fill out this form, okay, to see for what the student is eligible to receive. And then I mentioned that the two big grants are these two: the MAP grant, which is $8,064 currently maximum amount. The Pell Grant $73.95. We're talking over $15,459. Not only do I mention this to let them know that it could be affordable, but I also mention this information for the families that have issues because they don't want to, specifically tax issues, and I get to that in a bit, and who don't want to fill out the form. I tell them, well, basically you're missing out potentially on getting over $15,000 in free money because this is grant money. I don't tell them you have to fill out this form. I tell them it's up to you. But if you don't complete it, you could basically say you don't want to apply for these grants. Okay, so I put it in their court. I don't tell them you have to do this. I tell them it's your decision. I just tell them what the consequences or the repercussions would be of their decisions. And I mention all this because these are the type of conversations you may be having in those workshops. There's a lot of hesitancy from some parents to put in their information, okay, or for filling out the form. And we'll get that in a bit. And then we also see some misconceptions. Okay, we hear quite a bit of things in the field. My parents are undocumented, so I can't complete the FAFSA. Well, that's false. Remember, I go back to the point that everything is based on student eligibility. Okay, so the status of the parents don't matter. Okay, my parents don't claim me on their tax return. Let me repeat. If my parents don't claim me on their tax return, I will automatically be independent for the FAFSA. They figure they got a loophole. Sorry to break it to you, that's false. Whether the parents claim a student on their tax return or not does not make a student independent for purposes of the FAFSA. Okay, there's other factors that will determine whether student is independent or dependent for purposes of FAFSA. My parents don't file taxes, so I can't fill out the FAFSA. That's actually false. Some parents don't have to file a tax return. Or if they are supposed to file a tax return because they made above a certain threshold and they haven't filed it yet, you can still complete the FAFSA. Now, the college may later on say you need to file your tax return. That's a different scenario, but you can technically complete it now. All right. I'm undocumented. I won't qualify for any financial aid. In Illinois, that's false. In Illinois, undocumented students, if they meet certain criteria, which is basically 2 years K through 12, by the time they graduate from high school in Illinois and meet some other criteria, they can qualify for the state grant, which is the MAP grant, the $8,064. Okay, and they can also qualify for institutional aid. So those are the things that we try to address when it's brought up in the field. So we get these misconceptions. There are others, but these are the ones that we hear quite a bit. Now, there's also some challenges that we face in the field. We get questions from students about not knowing which form to fill, the FAFSA alternative application. Because there's some mixed status families that think, well, my parents are undocumented, the student is born here, so I have to fill out the alternative app, correct? No, it's all based on student eligibility. So the student fills out the FAFSA. They're like, oh, okay. And then some students like, can I do both? I go, no, don't do that. Don't do that. It's going to cause confusion for the colleges because they're like, okay, which one do you use, right? If the student is a U.S. citizen or permanent resident or an eligible non-citizen, and we'll talk about those types later on in the resources, they do the FAFSA. Okay, the alternative application is only when a student is undocumented and meets other criteria that they complete that form to qualify for the state aid and institutional aid. Some other factors that we've seen in the field is bad reception affecting the two-factor authentication. Okay. When students log in or parents log into their studentaid.gov account, enter the username and password, and then they need to enter a code that they get either by text or by email. Do the text, okay, because it's so much faster than the email. The email, I've seen it take, up to like 3 to 4 minutes, and nothing like parents just waiting, checking their email, and it hasn't come through. Text works so much faster, but that's where the reception is. The reception issue can come into play. So think about where you physically hold your workshops to help mitigate some of these factors. Okay, we're seeing more and more students, and that's parents getting locked out of student8.gov account. Okay, and some students too. Maybe a parent created an account for an older sibling, but then they changed their phone numbers and they forgot their email that they used and they can't get into it. Now they're locked out because they can't do the two-factor authentication. What we found is that there's really two options. You can contact Federal Student Aid, and if you contact them, I would suggest using the chat versus calling, because the calls, sometimes you're on hold for a long time. And we found that the information that we get or the answers that we get via the chat have been more helpful. Okay, we've had some challenges with getting information, when we call. And the other thing too is when an individual calls, it has to be the student or the parent. So if you're with them, you can't really hear what's going on unless you get put on speakerphone. With the chat, you can just see what's going on. So the chat works well. For folks that are locked out of student.gov account, there's actually FSA-ID recovery. FSA-ID is the old terminology for student.gov account. But you can go to, and I'll put the link in there, and this presentation is going to be shared with you, so you can actually go to that specific page. And I tell individuals to use their phone when they're using the student8.gov account recovery process, because you need to upload a state ID, like a driver's license. So it's easier to take a picture with your phone and upload it in that process versus starting on a laptop, then trying to get a picture that you can upload via the chat or via the web page on your laptop. I just found using the phone works better if you get locked out of student8.gov account. We've seen a lot of issues with taxes not being filed correctly. Okay, now what compounds the issue is the prior tax year. Okay, so what I mean by that is, so for students filling out the 26-27 FAFSA, so you always fill out the FAFSA for the year in which the student will be in college. We see that error being made and they fill out the wrong year. We've seen current seniors, 2026 grads, fill out the 25-26 FAFSA instead of the 26-27. It's always for the year in which they will be in college. That's the other thing that we see in the field, that they fill out the wrong year. So for the 26-27, they look at the prior, which would be 2024. Okay, so they look at the 2024 tax year. Okay, so if they're coming to your workshop and they didn't do their 2024 taxes, which is, like 2 cycles prior, they didn't do it correctly, now we got an issue. Okay, and we've seen issues where the parents are married, living together, but one of them files as head of household, or both of them file as head of household. One of the conditions to filing as head of household is you have to be unmarried or not married. So that's a problem. I've seen families who are not married living together, then they file married filing jointly. Okay. When the tax returns are done incorrectly, they may have to do an amended tax return. Okay. So that means that's 2024. If they did the same thing for 2025, now they're 2 years behind. And then that's where parents get really concerned. They feel they're going to get in trouble with the IRS. And they're going to get all these penalties, thrown in jail. And I tell them, hey, listen, the IRS is going to say, okay, you made a mistake. Actually, not you. If your tax preparer made a mistake. So if anyone's going to get in trouble, it's going to be the person you paid to do your taxes. Okay. For you, they'll just want to correct things. You may have, if you got a bigger refund than to which you were entitled, you may have to return some of that money, or you may be entitled to a higher standard deduction. So maybe you don't have to return any money whatsoever. Okay, so filing the taxes incorrectly is a big issue. Okay, which in the sense that it's a big issue for that specific family. It's not that it's prevalent in the field, It's just that when it does occur, it really makes things so much complicated. Now, just because they didn't file a tax return doesn't mean that they're in trouble or they're going to have problems. There's some people, some families that make their income is very minimal. They have limited income. They're not required to file a tax return. Okay, so what I tell families is let's do the FAFSA or the alternative application now, and then we'll fix. Then you should work with the tax preparer to get your tax return fixed. Okay. With that being said, this is where it's so important to be proactive. I told counselors, I told community-based organizations, hold a financial aid presentation in the spring for juniors and their families, but also invite the sophomore parents. Get them early, get them start thinking about these topics, specifically the tax information. Emphasize the importance of completing taxes properly. Let them know there's a number of free tax preparation organizations. For example, in Chicago, there's an organization called Ladder Up, and they do free tax preparation workshops for families that they make, I think, under like $42,000 a year. But there's also like free software online that families can use. There's also a Vita site locator, and this is the IRS. These are professional tax preparers or accountants and other like-minded individuals who offer the services for free. So the IRS has a site where you can go to see who may be available in your community. I encourage organizations to look at the local community college or therefore university to see if they may be holding some type of tax preparation workshops. Because paying someone to do your taxes can be pretty expensive, but there's a whole bunch of free sources, whether it's online free tax preparation software or a not-for-profit organization or a Vita site group that's doing these tax preparation workshops. Getting those taxes done is important. So bringing up that information during the spring could be helpful for when the students are ready to complete their applications in the fall. Encourage families to have conversations now about what they're willing to borrow, what they're willing to pay out of pocket. And having it now, what I mean is like junior year, spring of junior year, or even early fall of senior year. Having those conversations at that time makes those conversations in the spring of senior year much easier. Because as a parent, I'm a parent, and it would break my heart if I had to tell my son, we can't send you to your dream school because we just can't afford it. But if you have a conversation about what you can actually afford out of pocket, the students kind of get an idea as to what's financially viable and what's not viable. Because too often we come across individuals who's like, well, we'll just figure it out. I've yet to meet a family who figured it out and found extra money laying around. If there's a financial gap, if that scenario where they don't close the gap, there's still a gap, that may mean the parents have to take out Parent Plus loans. And once again, only borrow what you need to know more. And now there are going to be limits with the Parent Plus loans. Okay. And also with the parents, with the Parent Plus loans, I tell the parents, okay, well, do you have other children that are going to go to college? Well, what does that mean for them? Okay. For parents, it's a personal decision. If it's just, they have an only child, the parents are relatively young, they have plenty of time to work, maybe Parent Plus loans make sense for them. But if they're closer to retirement, does that mean if they take out Parent Plus loans, they have to work longer? Okay. If they have multiple kids, those Parent Plus loans will add up because it's not just for that first year, it's for potentially the following years. So you got to extrapolate the cost. So they're having those conversations early in the process about what's financially viable will make the conversation in the spring a lot easier. Okay. And this is why I also told families to apply to multiple colleges, as I'm sure as you folks are doing too, to get multiple offers of admission. Okay. And because the other thing too is sometimes students will end up enrolling at a college where they have a financial gap. They finish the semester and they owe the college money. Now the college says, well, you owe us money, so we're going to put a hold or drop your classes for the spring until you pay this, or they'll do it at the end of that year. Now the student's stuck. They can't continue on with their education. They owe money to the university or college. They may not be able to get their transfer to transfer somewhere else. It's a no-win situation, really. The other thing I tell families that they can do to get a general ballpark, idea of what they may have to pay out of pocket is to use what's available online with the net price calculator. Every college is required to have a net price calculator. Now, some are better than others in the sense that some are more up to date than others. So that's why I say a very general idea. And then this way you start getting ideas to what it may cost to send your student to college A versus college B versus college C. But there's other, it's not until you actually do the application for admission, the financial aid application, and you get the financial aid offer, do you see what really truly would be your out-of-pocket cost. If you want to get an idea what the SAI, the student aid index, is going to be for the family, use the FAFSA estimator. Okay. And these are things you can do also in the spring. Maybe you do it after your presentation. Maybe you do it in class. Start getting students kind of familiar with this process. With the FAFSA estimator, it's almost like it's a lot of it's almost not like filling the FAFSA, but a lot of the questions that are asked are mirrored from the data that's collected by the FAFSA itself. Okay, so you got your spring presentation that you could potentially do, and my core members can do those. They love doing them. And they do every year. They do over 900 of them across the state. But you can also do some other activities. You can do a student aid.gov creation workshop, where your student sits down and they create the student aid.gov account, because it'll speed up the process, come the fall, and they get more comfortable with logging into student aid.gov account. Okay, there's a few things that I tell students to do, or families to do. Don't use an email that has limitations on this capacity or their inbox. I've seen it with the iCloud accounts a lot, that they can't get more emails. So if they try to do the two-factor authentication, then they can't get that second factor if they're using the email to do that, or they're not getting those emails from federal student aid after a FAFSA is submitted because their capacity. Okay, and also have an email that they check regularly. Okay, and this goes for the students and for the parents, because sometimes parents will have an email that that they don't check as regularly. And I've also seen parents get locked out of their of an email account because they use the automatic save password, and they forgot what the password is and they can't get back into it. So trying to address those issues early on makes things easier come the fall. I was actually at a workshop where a college coach, who's actually a former core member, created this handout, and I'll share with you at the end so you can see what it looks like. And one side is English, the other side is Spanish. Actually, I'm sorry, English and Spanish, and one side's for the student, one side's for the parent, and they can write their username, their password, their security questions, and whatnot. And I tell them, put that with your tax return. Okay, this way it's in a safe place, because usually they put their tax returns in safe places. You have it there because in case we ever do need to manually input your tax information, it's right there with your student aid.gov account information. Okay, because sometimes we get parents, they show up and they're like, oh, my other kid created an account. I forgot what email they used or what password we settled on, and now they're locked out, and you got to go through that process of getting things locked and unlocked. Creating a student aid.gov account is pretty quick. So what I'm suggesting is also in the spring of the junior year, do a one-click college admit workshop where you sign up for the direct admission program through the state of Illinois. Okay, you put those things together and they go hand in hand. You create your student aid.gov account so you can do the FAFSA in the fall. You sign up for the one-click college admit program, so you'll get an email in mid-September saying these are the state universities and community colleges to which you've been admitted, and go to Common App to finish off the process. If you sign up now, you get that in the spring, in September. So combine those. My core members can help with these things. Do those things in the spring. And actually, I do have a little. You may not be able to see very well in this presentation, depending on your screen size. But this is the student aid.gov account creation handout. One side is English, the other side is in Spanish. And there's a PDF of this that we will be happy to share with you. Okay. And like I said, this is a really good way so you avoid those issues of the parents forgot the student aid.gov account username and password. This is another way to do it. Otherwise, I tell them to put it in their phone because they usually have their phones locked. Now, those workshops, how do we promote them? All right. Well, there's a few things that I would suggest. First of all, don't call them FAFSA workshops, because if you just call them FAFSA workshops, there may be students who qualify for the alternative application who won't show up. Okay, so I recommend using financial aid application workshops. However, in the body of the flyer or whatever message you have, mention the word FAFSA and alternative application for Illinois financial aid. Those both will be completed. Okay, this way students who can only do the alternative application are more likely to attend. Okay, if you don't have your own flyers that you've created, ISAC has some fillable flyers that we can share with you. Okay, my cormers have those. I can share, and I'll show you what they look like in just a bit at the end of the presentation when I share my other info. So you can use them. We have them in English and Spanish. As always, send multiple reminders in multiple formats. Some people read emails, some people don't. Some people prefer calls. So if you have robocalls, that's great. Send flyers home with students. Now do school announcements. The more frequently you mention a workshop, the better attendance you will have. You can send a what's needed for a FAFSA/alt app workshop postcard that you can order from ISAC's webpage. You can order them materials free and they get mailed to you at no cost to you whatsoever. So we have those postcards so you can send them ahead of time so they know what kind of information is needed for the workshop. And it's another reminder about the workshop. And then the other thing, a few days before your workshop, check the Federal Student Aid page to make sure there isn't an outage or system update, which may prevent your families from completing the form itself. Okay, I say limit workshops to a 2 to 3 hour time frame. In the evenings, the sweet spot, as I like to call it, is 6 to 8. That's when we usually get the best for attendance. If you do it on the weekends, Saturday mornings, 10 to 12, works great. People do it early, enough to do the things in the morning, go to the workshop, and then they have the rest of the day. I find those to be the sweet spot, but it can vary for every different individual. Now, with the workshop logistics, I always say computer lab or library are ideal in case you need to hop onto a computer that's connected to the Ethernet at your school. Okay, because sometimes there's tech issues with the laptops. The Wi-Fi may be spotty, or there's been situations where they're completing a part of the process, whether studentaid.gov account or the FAFSA, and it starts spinning because of connectivity issues. It happens more with the studentaid.gov account creation, but I found that once we move them to a hardwired computer, it works just fine. Okay. If you're using the library or the computer labs, computers, make sure they aren't locked or unlock them ahead of time. Don't wait to the start of the session because that could, it takes up valuable time. Have the URLs as to where they're supposed to go for the FAFSA alternative application in a visible place. Like if you have a blackboard in the front or a whiteboard, have them listed there or projected on the screen so they don't end up at a different site, because you'd be surprised what kind of things people click on after they Google FAFSA. Okay, space out the families throughout the space, the room, to help with those private conversations, because you may be asking very, personal questions about assets or maybe the status of a parent. And those are private conversations. You don't want other people eavesdropping. I know I've seen sometimes people try to put them like, fill up the first row, then the second row, space them out if you can, please. When I work with my staff members, I tell them to use a ratio of 10 students to 1 professional. Okay. Because otherwise it's not enough professionals in the room that can help out. Because if you just have 1 person, I would say have at least 2. Because if you have 1 person stuck with a complicated situation, you have other families waiting if they have questions. And let the families know who the helpers are in the room. That's why I tell my core members to wear their ISAC core t-shirts so they can be easily identified. So if you have lanyards or other identifiable equipment or shirts or on you, make sure that you point out to the families so they know who to ask. Okay. And then we have these postcards that call them what's next after completing the application that you can send with families so they can take home. It tells a little bit about what to expect after they completed the FAFSA or a college application. Okay. Now, the day of the workshop, you get questions. Okay, which parent's info is reported if they're separated? And sometimes you have the separated parents both right there and then. They like their kids so much that they put their differences aside and they show up to both fill it out. Okay, It's always about right now it's which parent provides the most financial support. And I show you a little schematic that kind of helps with that. Okay, it's not who reported whom on the tax return, it's who provided the most financial support. It's often the person who claimed on the tax return, but not always the case. Okay. We get questions about, who they want to be independent. Like, well, how do I become independent? Well, first of all, it's nothing to do which parent claims student in the tax return. Someone's considered independent for purposes of the FAFSA if they're like married, a military veteran, pursuing a graduate program, are in legal guardianship as determined by a court. Very, very, that's in a few other scenarios. Very, very specific information that can be documented, and the college may ask for that documentation. And that's why I always have a copy, a PDF of the FAFSA itself, so I can point those questions out. Okay, when a student is provisionally independent, because sometimes that'll happen because they say there's some extenuating circumstances or unusual circumstances for which I cannot provide parental information, they'll be considered provisionally independent. But in those cases, we need to let the students know that you have to follow up with each of the colleges to which you apply, or at least the college that you're thinking of attending, so you can follow up with the process to see what documentation they may need from you. Okay. Another challenge that we find, or tough scenario or question we get, is when the IRS tax return doesn't work, either because the marital status of the family has changed from when the taxes were filed and now, or up to this point, people who file a tax with the NITIN, individual tax identification number, we had to manually enter their tax information. So that could take some time. Okay. Now, the process for individuals with an ITIN, for them to be able to for the IRS to pull the information and transfer it over to the FAFSA, that should be occurring in a few months. So we may not have to do that manually, but nevertheless, for the moment, you may have to do that manually. So be prepared for that. Okay, you can become a little bit better versed with how to read a 1040. And with that scenario, I also like to help students point out where like the lines are at, the schedules, how you can tell one schedule from the other, those basic things. So later on, they could do it on their own. Okay, we don't do it for them. We help them so they can do it themselves. So then later they can do it on their own. And this is the schematic that I was talking about. Are the students' biological adoptive parents married to each other? Yes or no? Yes. Both parents info. No. Do they live together? Yes. Well, then both are info. No. Okay. Does one parent provide most support? Yes. Then that information? No. Okay. Well, then it's the person that makes the most money. So you kind of follow this little schematic here to figure out whose information to put on there. Now we come to the mixed status families. All right. So ultimately, it's up to them if they wish to complete the FAFSA or not. That really, truly is totally up to them. I do tell them that the current guidelines are very strict as to what information on the FAFSA is shared, with whom it's shared, and the purpose of why it's shared. Okay? That's the current situation. But we do not know what the future will hold. We don't know what kind of laws will be passed in the future. Because right now, everything related to the FAFSA is passed by Congress and signed by the executive office in regards to any changes, modifications to the form. I do, remind professionals that everybody wanted the IRS tax retrieval process to work well. It took years for that to work. Years for that to work. So it's slow moving. But currently, so any changes coming on the line, it may take a while. But currently, there are really strict parameters in place. I also mentioned to families that parents are not at any greater risk of completing their section of the FAFSA now if the parent or parents previously completed a tax return, or if they previously completed a FAFSA form for another child. Okay, so if they did that, if they filed a tax return or completed a parent section of the FAFSA previously, they're at no greater risk by providing information on the current FAFSA. And once again, it's totally up to them. Let them know so then they can decide what they wish to do. Okay. And truth be told, we haven't seen the decrease, or at least I haven't seen a decrease in the number of alternative applications that have been submitted by first of all undocumented students, but then also for FAFSA completion for the mixed status families. I think they're still doing it because Illinois is still ranked number 1 in the nation for FAFSA completion. So that's partly, a result of all the work that you folks have been doing at your schools and community-based organizations. in helping families complete their forms. So keep up the good work. So how can ISAC core members support your students? Well, they can help with your workshops. We have quite a few of them that speak Spanish. That's the most common request we get for Spanish speakers. I do have a few that speak other languages besides, obviously, English, but also besides Spanish. Okay. You can fill out an outreach request form, and that's where and we have all kinds of different activities and presentations we can do that the core members can do, but they can come and assist with your workshop. So if, say, you're doing a workshop and you're expecting 100 families, definitely reach out to us. Okay, so we can send multiple people out there to help with that workshop. With families that are hesitant to go to a workshop for whatever reason, or they can't make it, the core members are available for one-on-one virtual meetings, and they're confidential one-on-one virtual meetings in English or Spanish. Okay, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. On Friday, I think the last one's like at 4 p.m. 9 to 6 p.m. and and they could, and we do it virtually so they can share screens and we can guide them through the process. And we usually do anywhere from half a dozen to a dozen every single day. So we started this a couple of years ago. And then we have a few additional core members. So when you go to the booking page, if you have a family speaks Urdu or Hindi, you can connect them with Hiskiel. Okay. He works in the Art of the Harbor district, so he's in the northwest suburbs. And then we have Jiwoo, who speaks Korean, and she's in the Oakton district, so a little bit northern suburbs. Okay, and then we have Natalie, who speaks Polish. She's in the Joliet area. So if you work in those areas, they can come to your workshops. But otherwise, you can also connect with them through the booking. Okay, in families, I guess still got to figure out a way so their languages appear next to the name with the bookings platform. But they're available to help your students. Then we also have a First Generation Scholars Network program where the purpose of this program is to help transition students from high school to college and provide that critical support over the summer. But we need to know who they are. So we, in addition to connecting with other students, we provide information about summer supports. We reach out to them, in the fall to let them know when the FAFSA becomes available and the alternative application becomes available. We let them know about workshops that are available to them. We also let them know, hey, we check in and say, hey, if you haven't done your form, go do a booking so we can get your form done. So this is free. It's open to anyone, who's interested in being part of the First Gen Scholars Network. And then a few resources. I mentioned the handouts, which I'll show you just a moment, the fillable flyers. Actually, I think I'm going to show you all this stuff in just a bit. Oh, the last one, we have free webinars and in-person workshops conducted by our training team, of which Nicole is part of that team. So make sure you take advantage of that. And they have recordings of prior trainings on their page, which is isac.org/PD for professional development. And then if you ever really have any complicated situations, let me know. Okay. That's my contact email. I try to do a QR code. I'm hoping it works. If you click that, you should be able to view my contact info. And I have a few minutes left, so I'm going to exit out of this so I can show you some of the handouts. All right. To which I was referring. Where did they go?
Able not to cut you off, but you actually don't have a few minutes.
Oh, I don't? I thought I
No.
went to 11. Oh,
No, 10:50.
well, I would show you that this is the one flyer in English, this is the Spanish, so this is the worksheet. Yeah, I want to show you that, or they could order stuff. This is the tax information. It's all in the PowerPoint presentation. Okay, sorry, Nicole. Sorry, I went over. Let me stop sharing.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for attending. Thank you, Abel, for giving us that presentation. And just as a reminder, the recording and the slides will be available to you all later.
Bye, everyone.